The ballroom at the Caro Hotel held 400 people that night, and standing at the edge of it in a navy dress I had bought for the occasion and would probably never wear again, I understood that not one of them expected anything from me except my signature. The signature was already prepared. It sat on a single sheet of cream paper on a cocktail table near the stage, weighted down at one corner by a champagne flute nobody was drinking from, waiting the way a trap waits, patient and unbothered by how long it takes. 50 years of Hargrove Precision, the banner behind the stage said, in gold letters 3 feet tall, and under it, in smaller print, a line some marketing consultant had been paid a great deal of money to write. Built to last. I had helped build the parts that made that slogan true. I had not helped write it. I never get to write the slogans. I only get to make sure the machines that need to run at 4 in the morning actually run at 4 in the morning, which is a different kind of truth-telling, quieter and far less photogenic. My brother-in-law Marcus Whitfield stood at the microphone in a suit that cost more than most of our machinists make in a month, and he was smiling the particular smile of a man who believes the hardest part of the evening is already behind him. He had spent 11 months building toward this moment. I had watched him build it the way you watch weather come in from a long way off, slow and visible and impossible to stop by wanting it to stop. "Before we get to the parts everybody's really here for," he said, and the room laughed the easy laugh a room gives a man it has decided to like. "I want to talk for 1 minute about the future of this company, because 50 years is something to be proud of, but it's also something you can hide behind if you're not careful. And Hargrove Precision has spent the last few years being a little too proud and a little too careful." He did not look at me when he said it. He did not have to. Half the room already knew where his eyes would have landed if he had, and the other half would know within the hour. I stood near the back with the sheet of cream paper 30 feet away, and I thought about my father, who had built this company out of a single rented bay and a bank loan he'd been too proud to ever fully pay off early because he liked owing something to somebody who believed in him. He had been dead 18 months. This was the first anniversary gala without him in the room, and somehow that fact was being used tonight as an argument for why I should leave. I want to tell you how a person ends up holding a pen above her own name, ready to erase 22 years of service and 3 years of quietly keeping a company's lights on, without a single person in the room understanding what they were about to lose. To tell you that, I have to go back further than the ballroom. I have to go back to who I was before anyone in that room ever knew my name, and to a road on the other side of the world, where the only rank that mattered was the one you'd earned by staying calm when nobody else could. My name is Grace Hargrove. I was 46 years old that night, standing in a ballroom that didn't know what to do with me yet. I served 22 years in the United States Army as a military intelligence and logistics officer, and I retired a major. A fact that would have surprised most of the 400 people in that room, and one my brother-in-law had spent 3 years making sure they never learned. People hear combat and picture a door kicked in, a weapon raised, 90 seconds of adrenaline. That's not nothing, but intelligence and logistics is the unglamorous architecture underneath it, knowing which road is laced with pressure plates 3 days before anyone drives down it. Rerouting a convoy around a choke point because the math of being late in the wrong place has already killed people. Nothing happening is the victory. Nobody throws a parade for nothing happening. Marcus was still talking. I let the room hold that thought while I held mine. When I retired, I came home to a husband, Daniel, who'd flown helicopters for 16 years and now taught shop class, and to a company my father had spent 50 years building out of stubbornness and a good ear for metal. I took the title of Vice President of Operations. It was a small title for what I actually did. The reason the plant floor kept running when a supplier collapsed without warning. The reason we didn't lose our biggest aerospace client the year our inventory records corrupted. Because I rebuilt 3 years of counts by hand, floor by floor, the same way I'd once rebuilt a supply manifest in a tent with a headlamp, because men needed ammunition by morning. My sister Diane married Marcus 14 years ago, back when he was hungry and talented, and my father liked him, the way a self-made man always likes someone who reminds him of his own hunger. My father made him a vice president in 3 years, president of sales in 6, and when my father's heart started failing, the board made Marcus CEO because he was already half running the place, and because it was easier to imagine the company led by a confident man in a good suit than by the quiet daughter no one on that board had ever really watched work. What none of us knew, not me, not Diane, not Marcus, was that my father spent that same stretch of failing health doing something about all of it in the one place none of us would have thought to look, a lawyer's office, on a Tuesday, without telling a single one of us what he'd done. I didn't fight it. I didn't want the throne. I wanted the company to survive. And for 3 years, I quietly translated Marcus's promises into things the plant floor could actually deliver, the way I'd once translated an ambitious general's optimistic timeline into a plan that could be executed without getting anyone killed. I never told him that was what I was doing. I told myself that was humility. It took exactly one gala evening to understand some of it was closer to hiding.
The disrespect did not arrive all at once. It arrived the way water gets into a foundation, slow, through cracks so small you tell yourself they don't matter. In board meetings, Marcus called my 22 years some time in logistics and moved on before anyone could ask a follow-up question. At industry dinners, I became Grace, my sister-in-law. She handles our internal side of things.
The clearest crack came 18 months ago, in a conference room with the specs for a defense subcontract laid out on the table between us.
"This tolerance is out of range," I said. "If we ship it this way, it fails compliance audit inside 18 months. I'd stake my name on it."
Marcus looked at the numbers for exactly as long as it took to seem like he'd considered them. "Noted," he said. "Let's keep moving." He thanked me for my input. Then the meeting moved on, and so did the shortcut. Because taking my input seriously in front of other men in that room would have meant admitting, even to himself, that the company's actual engine had a woman's hand on the throttle.
11 months ago, we lost the contract. A competitor half our size took it because the specs had failed exactly the audit I had warned him about. 40 people were laid off in the same quarter. Marcus told the board it was market pressure. He told me, privately, with the door closed, that if I ever again let him walk into a room looking unprepared, there would be consequences. I stood very still when he said that. The way you stand still in front of a threat you have already decided is not, in fact, dangerous to you, only revealing about the person making it. I did not answer him that day either. Silence, for me, has never been surrender. It has always been an old, deliberate choice, the same one I used to make in rooms with worse stakes than a closed office door.
The gala tonight was supposed to be the turnaround story. For 6 months, Marcus had been courting Cross Dynamics, one of the largest defense and aerospace conglomerates in the country, for a supplier contract that could, by itself, rescue everything the failed audit had cost us. He had flown to 3 states to meet with their procurement team. He had rehearsed a pitch deck I'd watched him practice in the hallway mirror. And 2 weeks ago, he had come to me. Not Diane, not the board. Me, with a private ultimatum dressed up as a strategic conversation. Cross Dynamics leadership, he said, had concerns about our organizational structure. They wanted to see, in his words, a clean, forward-facing management team before they'd commit capital to a company our size. He said the optics of 2 family members in senior operational roles made investors nervous, that it read as insular and old-fashioned, and that if I would step back from my VP position, quietly, gracefully, effective immediately, framed publicly as my own decision to pursue other opportunities, it would remove, in his words, the last obstacle to closing the deal that would save 400 jobs, including, not incidentally, his own. I did not believe then that the objection had ever actually come from Cross Dynamics. I believed it came from Marcus, who had spent 3 years unable to explain to a room full of investors why the woman who ran his operations had never once had a title that matched what she did. But I could not prove that, and 400 jobs were 400 jobs, and my father's name was on the building. And I had spent 22 years learning that sometimes the mission requires you to accept a cost you would never accept for yourself. So I told him I would consider it. And tonight, in front of the entire board, 300 employees, a room full of investors, and a signed resignation letter he had, without asking me, already had legal draft and print on heavy cream paper, as though the outcome were a formality, Marcus decided that, considering it had gone on long enough, for 50 years,
he said into the microphone, and I watched him find me in the crowd now, deliberately, the way a man finds a mark he has already decided to hit. This company has been run on family loyalty, and loyalty is beautiful, but loyalty isn't a strategy. He smiled at the room, and the room, not yet understanding what it was watching, smiled back. Sometimes the most loving thing a family can do for a company is know when to let the next generation of real leadership take the wheel. Grace has given a great deal to this company's internal operations over the years, and we're all deeply grateful. He said grateful the way you'd think a coat check attendant.
But building the future Hargrove deserves is going to take real vision, real deal-making, the kind of leadership our new partners expect to see in the room. I think it's time we let the professionals, the real leadership, take it from here. Grace, honey, I think it's time you let the men in this company handle this part. Leave the corner office to real men.
There was a silence in the room that lasted perhaps a second and a half. In a room of 400 people, a second and a half is a very long time. I heard the specific silence of a crowd deciding, in real time, whether to laugh, and I watched a handful of them choose to, uncertainly. The way you laugh at a joke you are not sure was actually a joke, because the alternative is admitting you just watched a man humiliate his sister-in-law in public and did nothing. I did not laugh. I did not cry either. And I want to be honest that some small, tired part of me was almost grateful there were no tears in me to fight. 22 years teaches you what to do with your face in a room that has just turned against you, or at least believes it has. You do not give it your face. You give it stillness. I had built that stillness in places far worse than a hotel ballroom, and it did not fail me now. My heart rate did not climb. I checked, the way I always check. An old professional habit that has outlasted the uniform by 4 years and will probably outlast me.
Diane, 3 seats away, went white and did not move. I want to be fair to my sister in this story, because it is not a simple thing watching your husband humiliate your sister for an audience, and I have never believed the two of us stopped loving each other just because the men we chose turned out to want very different things from a family business. She did not laugh. She also did not stand up. I understood, even then, that this was its own kind of answer, and that I would have to decide later, in a quieter room, how much that answer cost her in my accounting of the evening. A board member walked the cream paper toward me on a small silver tray, as though it were a canapé and not a guillotine, and set it on the cocktail table at my elbow, along with a pen with the company's 50-year anniversary logo engraved into the barrel, a detail so absurd in hindsight that I have laughed about it since, though I did not laugh then.
I picked up the pen. I want to tell you honestly that I was ready to sign it. Not because Marcus was right about anything he had said. He was not right about a single word of it. I was ready to sign it because I had run the numbers on 400 jobs a dozen times in a dozen sleepless nights, and because I have spent my entire adult life understanding that sometimes protecting the mission means accepting a loss that has your name on it, and because my father built this company with his hands, and I was not willing to let my own pride be the reason it did not make it to 51. I set the pen against the paper. That is the exact moment the doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and 400 people, including me, turned to look. And the evening I had already made peace with losing turned, instead, into something none of us, least of all Marcus, had prepared for. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to take you back nearly 13 years, to a road I have not spoken about out loud more than a handful of times in my life, because the people who understand it best are the ones who are on it with me, and most conversations do not have room for what actually happened there. It was 2011. I was a captain then, 33 years old, assigned to a forward logistics and intelligence cell supporting reconstruction operations in a province whose name I still will not put into casual conversation, because some names deserve to stay in the rooms where they're understood. My job on paper was coordination, routing convoys, managing threat assessments, liaising between military escorts and the civilian contractors who did the unglamorous, essential work of rebuilding infrastructure nobody back home ever thought about. Power lines, water treatment, communications relay towers built on hilltops that mattered far more than their size suggested. One of those contractors was a small engineering firm called Halden Systems, under contract to install a communications relay array in a district we had cleared 8 months earlier, and were, on paper, supposed to consider stable. Paper is a generous word for what we actually knew. A 4-man Halden team had been embedded with a security element for 3 days, working a tower site 11 kilometers from the nearest forward operating base, and I had flagged, 2 days running, an unusual pattern of movement along their only viable extraction route. Livestock cleared from fields at hours nobody clears livestock, foot traffic that didn't match the rhythm of the villages nearby, radio chatter fragments that didn't add up to anything provable, but added up in my gut to something.
I want to be honest that intelligence work is rarely certainty. It is usually a collection of small wrongnesses that individually mean nothing, and together mean everything, if you have learned to trust the pattern over the absence of proof. I had learned to trust it. I pushed that morning for the team to be pulled a full day early, against a schedule that had already been approved 2 levels above me, against a commander who did not love junior officers reorganizing convoy timing off what he called, not unkindly, a feeling. I did not have proof. I had 22 months of pattern recognition and a feeling I would have staked my career on, and that morning, I staked it.
We moved the extraction up 6 hours. They hit the original route at the original time. I know that because we found the pressure plate residue the following week, on a stretch of road the Halden convoy would have been crossing at the exact hour they would have crossed it, had I not spent the previous evening rerouting them through a longer, uglier, safer path along the riverbed instead, over the loud objection of a logistics sergeant who thought I was wasting 4 hours of daylight on a hunch.
That would have been the whole story, and a good one, if the day had gone the way I planned it. It did not.
The riverbed route was safer from what I had predicted. It was not safe from what I had not. Halfway along it, in a narrow defile between 2 low ridgelines, the convoy took small arms fire from a position we had no prior indication of, an ambush built not around the tower team's original schedule, but around the road itself, patient, indifferent to which hour anyone drove down it. 2 vehicles were disabled. The Halden engineers, unarmed civilians, were pinned in a ditch alongside their security element, taking fire from an elevated position, with no clean line back to the vehicles, and a security detail that had already lost its senior NCO to a wound in the first 30 seconds. This is the part I need you to sit with, because it's the reason a stranger would walk through a hotel ballroom door 13 years later and stop an entire room cold. Not the ambush, what came after it.
I was not there in the ditch. I want to be precise about that, because this is not a story about a hero pulling anyone physically out of fire, and I have never wanted to borrow a kind of courage that was not mine to claim. I was 11 kilometers away, in a plywood operations room with 3 radios and a laminated map I had annotated so many times the acetate had gone soft. And for the 51 minutes that followed, my job was to be the only calm voice on 4 different frequencies at once. I redirected an aviation asset that had been assigned to a different sector, a call within my authority as the senior watch officer in the operations center that hour, the moment troops in contact was declared, before formal approval could work its way back down the chain, because by the time it did, the ditch would already have been silent. I built, in real time, off a memory of terrain I had walked twice on unrelated reconnaissance, a description of a covered route out of the defile that the pinned element could not see from where they lay, but that I could see, clearly, on paper, because reading ground from a map under pressure was the specific, strange thing my mind had been trained for years to do. I talked to a 23-year-old specialist, whose voice I did not recognize, and whose name I would not learn until the debrief. Through moving 4 wounded men and 2 panicked, unarmed civilian engineers 140 meters under fire, using nothing but my voice and a map, and 51 minutes in which I did not let my own voice shake once, because I understood, the way you understand very few things with total clarity in your life, that the moment my voice shook, 4 more people would not make it home. They made it home, all of them. The senior Halden engineer on that team was a lean, quiet civilian in his early 30s who had spent the 51 minutes half carrying a wounded soldier over uneven ground, while a captain's voice in his earpiece told him exactly which direction not to look. I met him exactly once, 3 days later, at the forward base, before his contract rotated him stateside for good. He did not say very much,
Men who have just been that close to their own ending rarely do. He shook my hand, and it shook a little, and I remember not minding that it shook, because mine had shaken too, 4 hours after the fact, sitting alone in the operations room once the frequencies had all finally gone quiet. He asked my name. I told him. He asked what unit patch was on my sleeve, and I told him that too. And he looked at it for what felt like a long time.
Before he left, I did something I had never done before, and never did again in 22 years. I took the unit challenge coin out of my own pocket, the one issued to every officer in the cell, and I put it in his hand and closed his fingers over it, because he did not have words yet for what he wanted to say, and I did not need him to find any. "Keep it," I told him, so some part of that day was worth carrying.
I never expected to see him again. I did not think about him often, not because the day did not matter to me, but because in 22 years there were other days, other roads, other names I had to hold on to with more urgency than a coin I'd given away in 3 minutes at the edge of a runway. I went home that year to bury nothing and lose no one, which by the standards of that war made it, in the strange arithmetic of survivors, a good year. I never learned what became of Haldon Systems, or the quiet engineer with the shaking hand. I had no reason to.
I only know the 51 minutes never left me. Neither, it turns out, did I leave the man on the other end of that ditch.
I did not know, standing in a ballroom 13 years later, with a pen against a resignation letter, what had become of him, or whether he even remembered a captain's voice in his earpiece telling him which way not to look. 13 years is a long time. I had learned, the way you learn to carry only what you can, to let go of things I couldn't take with me. I thought I had let go of that one too, the way you think you've let go of anything, right up until it walks back through a door.
I found out at the same moment the rest of the room did.
The doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and Julian Cross walked in. I recognized him before I understood why I recognized him, the way you recognize a shape in fog before your mind assembles the shape into a name, an instinct older and faster than memory. He was 50 now, gray at the temples, dressed the way genuinely powerful men dress when they've stopped needing to prove anything with a suit. And he came into that ballroom with the particular unhurried gravity of a man who has learned that rooms rearrange themselves around him without his needing to ask. Marcus saw him first among the board and moved toward him instantly, hand already extended, face already arranging itself into the smile he had clearly rehearsed for this exact entrance, the smile of a man about to close the deal of his career in front of everyone who had ever doubted him.
Julian Cross did not take the hand.
He walked past it. He walked past Marcus entirely, the way you'd walk past a coat rack, his eyes already moving over the room, searching, until they found me standing at the cocktail table with a pen in my hand and a resignation letter half signed beneath it. And something in his face changed, all at once, the practiced composure of a public figure cracking open into something much younger and much less guarded. "Major Hargrove," he said. The room, which had already been unsettled by the sight of him ignoring the outstretched hand of the man they'd all assumed was his host for the evening, went very quiet at that. I had not heard my own rank spoken out loud in 4 years. I felt it land somewhere just beneath my sternum, the way you feel a word you had genuinely believed nobody left alive would ever say to you again. "It's Grace now," I said, because it was true. And because for one disoriented second, it was the only thing I could think to say. "It'll always be Major Hargrove to me," he said. And then he did something that took the rest of the air out of that ballroom. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and drew out a coin, worn nearly smooth along one edge, the kind of worn that only happens when a man has carried something in the same pocket, rubbed the same spot with the same thumb, for the better part of 13 years. He held it up between us, not for me, I already knew what it was, but for the room. 30 of you in this room work for a company called Hargrove Precision, he said, his voice carrying without needing to be raised, the voice of a man who had learned in a very different kind of room that volume is what you reach for when you are not certain of the truth, and he had clearly never needed to reach for it. I imagine most of you know this company by its name on your paycheck. I know it by a different name. 13 years ago, in a location I'm not going to describe, in a ballroom, 4 of my engineers, myself included, were pinned in a ditch under fire with a wounded security team, no clear route out, and no reason to think we were walking away from that hillside. There is exactly one reason I am standing in this room tonight instead of on a plaque somewhere.
That reason is the woman standing at that table.
He turned toward me fully now, and the room turned with him, 400 faces swinging like a compass needle finding north. She rerouted our convoy on a hunch nobody above her wanted to approve, and it saved us from an ambush she never got credit for preventing, because the ambush that mattered happened somewhere else entirely, on a road she couldn't have predicted. And when it did, she spent 51 minutes talking a 23-year-old specialist through carrying wounded men and unarmed civilians 140 meters under fire, using nothing but a map and her voice, without that voice ever once shaking loud enough for us to hear it.
I have built a company worth more money than I ever imagined touching in 13 years, on the back of one fact I never let myself forget. That a person like that exists, and that I owe the entire rest of my life to her having done her job well, on a day when almost nobody would have known if she hadn't.
He closed his hand around the coin.
I've been trying to find her for 13 years. I did not know until 40 minutes ago, when my own security team ran the standard background check I insist on before signing any 9-figure contract, that Major Grace Hargrove and the operations lead at the company my procurement team has spent 6 months evaluating were the same person. Your CEO. And here, for the first time, he looked at Marcus, and it was not an unkind look so much as an entirely uninterested one. The look you give a piece of furniture that has inconveniently placed itself between you and the door. Described her to my team in 6 months of meetings, exactly once, as internal operations.
I would like someone in this room to explain to me how a man spends half a year negotiating a defense contract without once mentioning that his own company employs a Silver Star recipient. I'm sorry, forgive me, I misspoke, he corrected himself, and something in his face tightened almost imperceptibly. A Bronze Star with valor, is that right, Major? He looked at me for the first time since he'd started speaking, and there was something almost gentle underneath the fury in his eyes. I never got to ask you what they gave you for it. I only ever heard, secondhand, years later, that you got something. I had never told anyone in that room, including my sister, including my own husband, beyond the barest facts, exactly what I had received for that day. I have my reasons, the same reasons I imagine most people who have ever earned something like that share. It does not feel like a medal when you're the one who lived through the day it commemorates.
Bronze Star, I said, with valor. Marcus, who had gone the color of the tablecloths somewhere in the middle of Julian's account, found something in himself in that moment that I still, months later, do not fully understand. Some men, cornered, go quiet and take the correction like a man. Others, cornered, decide the only way out is straight through, no matter what they leave in ruins behind them. Marcus chose the second kind of man to be.
With respect, Mr. Cross, he said, and I watched him try to rebuild his smile out of pieces that no longer fit together. I think we should be careful about letting an emotional reunion, however moving, dictate a 9-figure business decision. Grace has never once mentioned any of this to the board in 3 years. Frankly, that raises its own questions. Anyone can claim a connection to someone powerful. For all any of us actually know, this is a story she's cultivated, or one you've misremembered the details of after 13 years and a great deal of money. I mean no disrespect to your service, sir, truly, but this company's future can't be built on a war story nobody in this room can verify. There it was. I had heard some version of that sentence before, in different rooms, aimed at different targets, and I recognized its architecture immediately, the move a person makes when the alternative to being wrong is unbearable to them, so they reach instead for the accusation that costs the accuser nothing, because they have already decided, somewhere down in the foundation of themselves, that the person across from them does not have the standing to be believed without a stranger's permission. I felt the old familiar settling in my chest, the one that is not anger, not yet, the cold quiet that comes before a storm you have already survived, and know, calmly,
that you will survive again." I did not raise my voice. I have found across a great many rooms far worse than that ballroom that the truth does not require volume. Volume is what you reach for when you are not certain the thing you're saying is true, and I have rarely in my life been more certain of anything.
"Marcus," I said, "I am not going to defend a day I nearly didn't come home from to a man who wasn't there and doesn't want to hear it. I don't need you to verify it. It happened whether you believe it or not, and it happened to men and women who were there, several of whom are still alive because of decisions I made in 51 minutes you will never have to understand the weight of. You don't get a vote on whether it's true. You only get a vote on whether you're going to be the kind of man who calls a woman a liar in front of 400 people rather than admit once that he was wrong about her." I turned then back to the table, to the resignation letter, still half signed, the anniversary pen still in my hand, and I tore it once, cleanly, down the middle, and set the two halves down beside the champagne flute nobody had been drinking from.
"I'm not signing that," I said. "I never should have picked up the pen."
What happened next did not happen because of me. I want to be clear about that, because the easy version of this story ends with me tearing a piece of paper and the room erupting into applause, and that is not quite what happened, and I am more interested in telling you the true version than the satisfying one, even though, as it turns out, the true version was more satisfying than I could have designed on my own. Our family's longtime attorney, a soft-spoken, precise man named Ordway, who had drafted every contract my father ever signed, and had known me since I was 9 years old riding my bike through the plant parking lot after school, stood up from a table near the front. He had been quiet all evening, the way lawyers who know something the room does not are trained to be quiet.
"For what it's worth," he said, into a silence that was already leaning his way, "the resignation Mr. Whitfield asked Miss Hargrove to sign tonight would not have changed control of this company, even if she had signed it. And I think, given everything that's just been said, the board deserves to know why." He explained, in the plain, unhurried language of a man who has spent 40 years making complicated things sound simple, that 18 months ago, in the final amendment to his estate, my father had placed 51% of Hargrove Precision's voting shares into a trust in my name, not Marcus's, not Diane's, mine alone, with a single triggering condition written into it at my father's own insistence, that the shares would remain passively held exactly as they had been for 3 years, unless and until any attempt was made to remove me from operational leadership of the company without cause. At that point, and only at that point, full voting control would transfer to me, automatically, irrevocably, no board vote required. My father, it turned out, had understood exactly what he was watching happen in his own company for the last several years of his life, and had said nothing to any of us, because he had wanted, more than anything, for us to find our own way to the right ending without his hand forcing it. He had simply made certain that if we could not find it ourselves, the ending would find us anyway. The trigger activated the moment Mr. Whitfield presented that resignation letter as a condition of continued employment rather than a voluntary choice, Ordway said, which means, as of approximately 9 minutes ago, Miss Hargrove has held controlling interest in this company. I apologize for the timing. I was waiting to see if it would be necessary to say so out loud. I watched Marcus's face do something I will remember for the rest of my life. It is not a kind thing to watch a person understand, all at once, in front of everyone whose respect he has spent a decade curating, that he has spent that entire decade standing on ground that was never fully his to stand on. I did not enjoy it exactly. I want to be honest that some small, tired part of me did, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, because I think pretending you feel nothing at a moment like that is its own kind of lie, and I have tried, across this whole story, to only tell you true things.
But mostly what I felt was tired, and mostly what I wanted was for it to be over.
"Marcus," I said, and I kept my voice level, because I had learned a long time ago that a hammer swung with control does more work than one swung in anger. You built some real things here. I'm not going to stand up here and tell this room you didn't. But you spent 3 years building them on top of a woman you told our own investors wasn't worth naming. And tonight you tried to force her out of a company her father built, on a night meant to honor him, in front of everyone he ever trusted.
because it was more convenient for you than admitting the company runs on work you never once understood. That's not a strategy problem. That's a character problem. And I don't build strategy around people with character problems. I looked past him to the two men from hotel security standing near the ballroom side entrance, doing the quiet, watchful job hotel security does at every large event. Mostly ignored, mostly unnecessary.
I'd appreciate it, I said, to them, not to Marcus, if you'd help Mr. Whitfield collect his things and see him to his car. He no longer has authorization to be in this building in an executive capacity.
I did not raise my voice for that either. I did not need to. The two men crossed the room, not roughly, not unkindly, the way professionals do a job that has nothing personal in it. And Marcus, to his credit, and I will give him this much, did not fight it. He looked for one long moment at Diane, who had still not stood up, still had not said a single word through any of it, and something passed between them that I could not read, and did not try to. Then he let himself be walked out, past 400 people who had spent the last 20 minutes learning exactly what kind of man he was, into a parking lot he would have to find his own way home from. The room did not erupt. I want to be honest about that too, because I think it matters. There was no applause, not right away. There was the particular quiet of a room that has just watched something true happen and does not yet know what to do with its hands. Somewhere near the back, I heard someone start to clap, tentatively, and it spread the way that kind of thing spreads, uncertain and then all at once sure of itself, until 400 people were on their feet. And I stood there at the cocktail table with a torn resignation letter in 2 pieces beside me and did not know for a moment what to do with my own hands either. Julian Cross closed the distance between us while the room was still finding its feet, and he did not say anything grand. He simply pressed the coin, the same one I had given him 13 years earlier, back into my hand.
I think you're overdue to be the one carrying this, he said. The contract's real, by the way. It always was. I just wasn't going to sign it with a man who couldn't say your name correctly in 6 months of meetings, running the company on the other end of it.
Diane found me before I left. She had waited by the coat check, the way you wait for someone when you are not sure they'll want to see you, and you have decided to risk it anyway. She did not try to explain the 11 months, or the closed office door, or the 1.5 of silence in the ballroom before the room decided to laugh.
I should have stood up, she said. I've been telling myself for 3 years that staying quiet was keeping the peace. I think it was just keeping me comfortable. I'm sorry, Gracie. I mean it. I did not have a speech ready for that either. I hugged my sister in a hotel lobby at 11 o'clock at night, and I told her the truth, which was that I did not need her to have stood up in that particular second. I needed her to stand up in the next one, and the one after that, for as long as it took to mean it, and that I was willing to let this be the start of that, instead of the end of us. I drove home with the coin in the cup holder of my car, not in my pocket, because some part of me was not ready to carry it that close yet. And I let myself into a quiet house where Daniel had waited up, the way he always waits up, with the porch light on and our old Shepherd mix radar, thumping his tail against the floor without bothering to fully wake up. Daniel took one look at my face and did not ask what happened. He just put the kettle on, the way he has for 20 years, and let me tell it in my own time, in my own order, the parts that mattered first, and the parts that didn't at all. I went upstairs before bed and opened the top drawer of my dresser, the one I do not open often, and I took out the small blue case with the bronze star inside it, and I set it, for the first time in 3 years, on top of the dresser, instead of underneath the folded sweaters where it usually lives. I did not do it for anyone else to see. Daniel already knew. I did it because I understood. Finally, standing in that quiet bedroom with the coin still in the cup holder of a car parked in the driveway below, that I had spent 3 years treating the proof of the bravest thing I ever did like it was something to be embarrassed about, and I was done doing that. I did not walk away from that ballroom feeling like I had won something. I walked away understanding something I wish someone had told me a long time ago. Quiet competence is not the same as invisibility, and you are not required to accept the second just because you have chosen the first. There is a different thing, dressed up to look like humility, which is actually just fear.
fear of taking up space, fear of being called difficult. That is not a virtue. It is a cost, and you are the only one who pays it, for as long as you agree to keep paying it. You do not owe anyone a war story to justify your seat at a table you built with your own hands. I got lucky that night. Most people who are underestimated do not get a stranger to walk through a door and say their name out loud in front of everyone who doubted them. I know that. But the work you do in the dark is never actually invisible. It is only unacknowledged, and those are two different things. Somebody is always watching, even when you're certain nobody is. I run Hargrove Precision now, as CEO, by my own choice, 3 weeks after the board asked, unanimously. Diane sits on the board too, in a seat she asked for and earned. Marcus is not in the building anymore. I do not know what story he tells about that night. I have thought about him more kindly than you might expect, the way you think about weather that has already passed through. The coin sits on my desk now, next to a photograph of my father in front of the rented bay he started this company in, 50 years and 1 lifetime ago. Some debts take 13 years to come due. When they finally do, they do not need you to defend them. They only need you to stop apologizing for them and let them, finally, speak for themselves. If you have ever stood in a room where somebody decided who you were before you had said a word and swallowed it because correcting them felt too costly that day, I would like to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what you did, or what you wish you had done. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.